Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, Season 4, Episode 4. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on this episode is Kirstin Beardsley, CEO at Food Banks Canada. So that you mentioned a couple of times in the interview that while we had Lori Nicol, president of Second Harvest, on the podcast, I looked, it was like way back in the fall of 2020. So having a guest on the pod talking about food insecurity is really long overdue, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. And Food Banks Canada have been busy. I mean, recently they just released a report on, it's a report card on how provinces are doing when it comes to food insecurity and ranking Quebec the best and Nova Scotia the worst. We spoke about it, I think it was a few weeks ago. And now the Hunger Count, which is an annual report looking at, I guess, the business of food banks, if you want to call it that way, is going to come out in a couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to that report. Always a great report, well written. And Kristin has actually been involved with Food Banks Canada for almost a decade. And
a long time.
She's just been great. And she's newly appointed. So it's a fresh voice. And I'm looking forward to hear more about her thoughts about the role of food banks. I know a lot of people listening to us believe that food banks shouldn't exist. I actually don't believe that. I think we should make sure that food banks are there for people who need it, but it doesn't mean that governments are off the hook.
If I was to articulate my thinking on that, it's food banks should not be seen as a part of the system. In other words, they should not be institutionalized as in, this is another technique to feed people. They should not be necessary.
Well, they are institutionalized now. I mean, let's face it. Because look at COVID. I mean, I actually, if you remember, we were asked by the Auditor General of Canada to review programs related to food during COVID, and one of the best programs we saw, and Roy McAlpine, actually former VP of Maple Leaf, was also an educator with me, and we both realized that when it comes to outcomes, that program to support food banks really was outstanding. It really helped. On a dime, food banks were able to help thousands of people, like thousands. And government programs can't operate as quickly as that. So, and that's why we gave an A grade for that particular program to the Auditor General, and she reported favorably about it.
Well, it's interesting, and maybe it's a discussion when their report comes out. We can have a further discussion. But when you think about and we talk about it in the interview, the percentage of seniors Canadians that use food banks, it's going up, but it's very low because basically senior citizens have guaranteed income with the OAS, right? So maybe there's other bigger solutions that we tried that in Ontario, but the Ford government shut it down in a cruel stroke of whatever the Ford government was thinking, because it seemed to be solving some, long-standing
It was
issues.
a missed opportunity, and as you know, Michael, I'm testifying on Thursday before the Finance Committee. It's their annual tour. Yeah, they tour the country to get ideas for the budget. Essentially, this is the time of year they do it. And I was invited. I was honored to be invited, to be honest, because FINA is always an interesting place. It can go in many different directions.
Sure.
Unlike ag or health, FINA is the workhorse of all parliamentary committees. They work really hard. Well, these days, I guess ethics would be the top choice. But finance is actually pretty busy, and tomorrow I'll be coming in with like a recommendation to look into a Canadian SNAP program. A lot of Canadians don't know, but many farmers markets across the country do have a SNAP program in Canada already, and those programs are highly successful. And I'm thinking of inviting a guest for this podcast to talk more about some of the positive outcomes we've seen about these programs, these SNAP programs in Canada. Food stamps given to people so they can actually shop at farmers markets. It's been really helpful, and we have some in Nova Scotia. There are some in Quebec and Ontario where you are. So it's been really helpful, and I do think that there's some merit in considering a SNAP program for Canada, given the fact that, we gave $2.5 billion to 11 million people in July without knowing for sure it helped our food insecurity situation. So we need to do something else.
Yeah, and I want to get to that a little later as we kind of fold it into the, I guess, the outcome of the Thanksgiving meetings, the Thanksgiving press conference. But let's fold that into a little bit later. I did want to start, I guess, in some ways where we now must, the terror, the horror, and the murder in Israel. As one commentator observed, the Nazis tried to hide their crimes. Hamas is live streaming them. In some ways, I don't want to talk about this, but I also don't want to look away or be silent about it. Now, we're not a world affairs podcast, but any thoughts around food insecurity? I know I enjoy my, it's an anodyne thing, but I enjoy my Israeli grapefruits.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, it is. I mean, this is not a global affairs podcast, as you mentioned, but we're humans. And this is about humanity. It's about rights, and it's just terrible what happened. But obviously, we always look at things looking at food systems, and perhaps implications. And so far, I must say, am I concerned about what's going on right now? Well, if it escalates, probably. The first thing that came to mind when the massacre occurred on Saturday was, how markets would react. The reaction was actually quite muted. Other than wheat futures went up maybe half a day this weekend. That's it, and they went back down. So markets are pretty calm. Fertilizers, 3% of potash is exported out of the region. So we think that perhaps fertilizer prices could be impacted, but again, it's not a major player. But if, say, Iran gets involved and other nations get involved, that's when I think markets are going to get a little bit more nervous. But other than that, I mean, I must say, I've been to Israel, and I have the utmost respect for that country. It's just amazing what they've done with food production systems that they have. They can actually produce watermelon in the desert. I mean,
what is it? Remilk is an Israeli company, right?
Remilk is Israeli. Yeah, absolutely. And we tasted some of the products on this podcast. It's just they call it Startup Nation for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, the entrepreneurial spirit in Israel is just amazing, and I'm just hoping that everything that's going on right now won't compromise any of that, because we have so much to learn from the Israeli people. And when I think about agriculture and food and the resilience that they face, that nation faces, it's just there's so much to learn here.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the people of Israel. I guess we'll stay tuned. Let's move on to Canadian issues, Canadian political issues. Was it you that said the sound of one hand clapping the Thanksgiving Day presser by the minister and deputy prime minister last week? The grocers presented their plans and actions independently, as they must, of course. When I heard one hand clapping, I laughed to myself, because it's like I didn't hear anything from the government. I didn't hear them come forward with anything other than it's not saber rattling, but it's more carrot rattling, I guess. There's lots of things that they could do. You talked about this SNAP program, but, GST, there's powerful actions the government can take, but I'm not hearing any of that. Are they holding back? Are they waiting to use it at a better time? Let's talk about what they could be doing and why you think they're kind of holding back in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like clapping with one hand for the short term. For the longer term, I think the Minister Champagne got it right. For example, the reforming Bill C-56 to reform the Competition Bureau, I think that act needs help. We need a watchdog with more teeth. The code of conduct, the grocer code of conduct, I would have actually liked to hear from the minister that all grocers are now endorsing the code, and they want to accelerate the adoption of the code. André Lamontagne, the Minister of Ag, who's been on our show before, did announce yesterday that he expects the code to be implemented early 2024. So let's see, because he's actually in the driver's seat.
That's kind of on track. I mean, there's no new news there, right? I mean, the code was already underway, and it was coming anyway. So
that's right.
It's not like the minister can stand up and go, and we're going to have a code of conduct. I mean, that was already happening, right?
No, but it's been delayed. It's been delayed a few times. But I mean, when you think about who actually co-chairs the committee, it's him and this new guy called Lawrence McCauley, who just replaced Marie-Claude Bibeau as ag minister at the federal level. So La Montagne is really the sage co-chair of this.
He's a pretty pivotal guy. He's a pivotal guy in the industry now. Right?
And he's a former grocer. He understands distribution. And when it comes to Lawrence McCauley, he's a former dairy farmer. Like as soon as you get closer to consumers, he doesn't really understand supply chain dynamics as much as La Montagne. So, but it was funny when Champagne actually was making an announcement about discounts and price freezes and things like that. Mariki Walsh from the Globe and Mail, we were actually texting each other back and forth during the press conference.
I heard that. She didn't say your name, but she said, and the professor said.
The professor said, so that was me. And I basically said business as usual. And she was really good. I mean, she was really putting a lot of pressure on a minister, and frankly, and we were able to speak to each other after the press conference. But it was.
I think he invited her to listen to the transcript. It's my recollection of the way that went.
That's right. But anyways, I like her work. I mean, she's just great. And but I must say, it was quite disappointing. And that night, the minister called me and we spoke on the phone, and I told him that there were some missed opportunities. For example, I mean, when you look at Minister Fraser, who decided to, along with Prime Minister Trudeau, obviously, they decided to eliminate the GST on new builds for rentals, like almost overnight. And
we're seeing activity almost overnight.
And now we have, when you walk into a grocery store, 4,600 products are taxed. And a lot of people think, well, that's just junk food. Not really. I mean, if you remember a few weeks ago, we had Made with Local joining us. Yeah. And Made with Local is a very natural, sustainable, pure product made right here in Canada.
In fact, I now always travel with my Made with Local. I got this one from my friends at London Drugs.
And there's at the counter ready department, you have salads, fresh salads, and you pay a premium because they're pre-prepared. You know, you can actually get a Caesar salad for $16. You pay a premium for that salad, and you still have to pay a tax. And I do wonder whether or not it's time to review the zero rate policy at the CRA. And that's exactly what I'm going to be recommending this week in Parliament. I think we need, and of course there's shrinkflation. A lot of products have been shrinkflated, so much so that they're now considered snacks, and snacks are taxable.
Now, what was it? I remember earlier or late in last season we talked about it. I think it was a Haagen-Dazs ice cream that went below 500 mil, and then the price increase was double. Basically, it shrunk. Shrinkflation, and then it triggered the tax, right?
That's right. And President's Choice, of course, they've not gone under 500 grams, so they're very careful with that. But that rule, I think, is a little silly. I think we need to look into this, and so we actually made some estimates. And I did say that to the minister. We actually believe that Canadians are actually paying anywhere between $300 to $900 million in sales taxes at the grocery store, and that money goes back to Ottawa. So in other words, you and I, consumers, are paying an extra $300 to $900 million to get our food. And so I think some of it should stay there. I mean, should we tax, certain products like chocolate bars? Probably. But there are some really darn good products, Canadian-made products out there that are taxed, and they shouldn't be.
Well, and I guess to round that point off, so there are things, and you've talked about talking with you're in Ottawa testifying. What is it, for the 18th time or something like that?
including Senate, both.
Including Senate. So if you put them all together, there are things that the government can do on their own behalf, to solve the issue. So we hope the ears are open. And
it's been challenging because a lot of fingers are pointed at grocers right now to bring prices down or to stabilize prices. And I'm trying to, even when I met with the Big Five with the minister in Ottawa on September 18th, I did raise that issue and trying to really focus the attention more on Ottawa and what Ottawa can do. And of course, there's this other issue with milk going on right now because November 1st is coming.
So, let's talk about that. The CFIG, Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers, is triggering a mechanism, what they call the exceptional circumstance mechanism. And off mic, you were saying that could be higher or lower. But it's been
there since 2017.
Yeah, so it's either higher or lower. So they've submitted this exception that they don't want the Canadian Dairy Commission, again, a Crown corporation. Is it a division or a Crown corporation?
It's a Crown corporation. You and I own it.
You and I own it. Which is fall under the Ag Minister?
Ag. A former dairy farmer.
Oh, wait. So another thing that the government can think about in terms of helping Canadian food affordability. So what is this mechanism? And I guess we've talked about it many times that the Canadian Dairy Commission
any stakeholders within the supply chain can actually trigger that clause for one reason or another. For example, and often it's due to food inflation. Last year, dairy farmers did the opposite. They triggered that clause because food inflation was high, arguing that, well, if food prices are going up, milk prices should be going up as well because our costs are going up. And that's why in 2021, 2022, prices went up twice, recommended by the Canadian Dairy Commission. And if you remember, Mike, on our podcast, I shared with you a leaked document showing that the cost of production actually went down, not up. And they still got away with an increase. And so this time around, what is clever from the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers is that they're actually trying to get ahead of the dairy farmers, saying, let's actually think about this the other way around and think about the consumer, because the consumer right now is under tremendous pressure at the grocery store. This is not the time to raise prices because eventually, if you raise prices at farm gate, consumers are going to be impacted because Saputo and Lactalis and all processors won't have much of a choice but to increase prices. Right. And the one thing that Canadians don't know is that farm gate prices, not retail prices, industrial prices in Canada are 17 times higher than in the U.S.
So when you say industrial prices, that means what like Lactalis would pay
exactly
in their back door before they
exactly
process it.
And what has been
17 times more expensive
17 times. And so what has been happening over the years is that we've seen the Dairy Farmers Canada. I've seen it so many times. It's so predictable. They'll come out and they'll play around with numbers and data. They'll share that data they'll play with the currency. They'll play with the volume. Because in the United States, it's not kilos, it's CWT, which is under measurement for pounds. So they'll play around with all these things to confuse the heck out of consumers and media will just believe the Dairy Farmers of Canada and they'll just move on. But the reality is that milk prices in Canada are much more expensive, compromising the competitiveness of processors and retailers.
Now, let's put some numbers to that, then we can kind of wrap up on this particular segment. The Canadian milk farm price is $10.22 per kilogram. Is that right?
That's right.
And U.S. farm price is 43 cents?
0.43.
So
US,
43 U.S. per kilogram. Now, when you say U.S.,
in kilos,
that's not is that U.S. dollars? Is that Canadian
U.S. dollars?
That's U.S. dollars. Okay, so it's higher than 43.
With the conversion, you're talking, the difference is about 17 times, basically.
Okay. 17 times. All right.
Yeah, it's an estimate, but the difference is actually quite. Yeah. It's huge. It's huge, and that's why. Right. I mean, Saputo has been quietly, hitting the can about supply management, and a lot of people. At the end of the day, when you look at retail prices, differences are significant but they're not as significant as the difference you would find with industrial prices for sure.
They're not 17. I was going to say it's not 17 times more expensive to buy.
No, it's about, if you go to Vermont, for example, or Maine, you're going to see perhaps milk half price, maybe.
Okay.
But industrial prices, that's the price nobody sees. The difference is actually quite shocking. And people need to, last night I actually got a farmer because I did some calculation. I wanted to validate with a farmer, a former dairy farmer. And he actually responded to me through Twitter, direct message, and say, I can't post this because my neighbors are going to go after me. I posted that on Twitter this morning. It's just, the fear is so unhealthy. It's just so amazing how powerful that lobby is.
Well, so you're testifying in Ottawa. Actually, I think you're testifying in Halifax in Ottawa,
right?
Yeah,
it's in Halifax. So it's a road show. So it's kind of convenient for me because I can just, I don't have to take the plane. It's the first time I've actually testified away from Ottawa. So it's going to be nice.
It's good for them to get to the East Coast. I enjoyed my trip there, and it was very refreshing to be in Halifax. I hadn't been there in a while, and I've missed it. So I'm sure the committee will enjoy hearing from the voices in Halifax. Speaking from hearing from voices, let's take a break for the news of the week. Let's have a listen to our excellent interview with Kirstin from Food Banks Canada.
We have the pleasure to have with us this week Kirstin Beardsley, the CEO of Food Banks Canada. I can't believe that we've never had someone from Food Banks Canada over the last 4 years, but now we have the new CEO. Kirstin, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So can you start by telling us about your background and how you became involved with Food Banks Canada in the first place? I know you were at Food Banks Canada before you became CEO, but what motivated you to take on the role of CEO?
Sure. I've been at Food Banks Canada for just over 9 years. I joined in 2014, and I've always come from a nonprofit sector background. So I've always worked in the charitable sector since about 2001. And what really motivated me to take on the CEO role, which I've been in since February 2022, was, I love this work. I consider myself the luckiest person I have the best job in Canada. And witnessing how food banks stepped up during the pandemic. I've get to witness, the strength and the innovation and just the amazing work that goes into food banking, since I started at Food Banks Canada. But during the pandemic, the way food bankers were, there's nothing I can say other than heroic, was just such an honor to witness. And so to be able to take a leadership role in serving and supporting this wonderful group of people is really what motivated me to step into the CEO role.
Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, food insecurity is a reality in Canada. What's your reading of the situation right now in Canada? We're into October 2023, a few years after the start of the pandemic. Tell us exactly what you see as a picture when it comes to food insecurity in Canada.
Well, right now, it's not good. We are seeing the highest levels of food insecurity ever that we've seen in Canada since we started measuring. So, and that's federal data. That's not food bank data. So that's 6.9 million Canadians are living in food insecure households. So it's hard to imagine in a country like Canada why 6.9 million people would be experiencing food insecurity. And we're seeing that reflected in the food banks. So food insecurity is a spectrum. Not everyone who identifies as food insecure is going to need the support of a food bank, but we're seeing right now the highest levels of food bank use ever in Canadian history. So it's not good. We know that there was a lot of food bank use heading into the pandemic, and now that sort of ongoing need, the broken social safety net that forces people to use the food bank, is being met with, of course, the high costs that we're all experiencing, and just too many people aren't able to make ends meet and coming to need our services.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that right now, looking ahead, do you think that things are getting worse? Do you expect that the worst is behind us? How do you see the future, the distant, not so distant future, but in terms of food insecurity in Canada, how do you see the picture right now?
It's hard to see a lot of the trends getting better at the moment. I mean, I'm no economist, but when you hear how many people are going to be renegotiating mortgages, for example, and people who wouldn't have been considered in housing stress, having to downsize, having to move into rental housing, having to, there's a trickle down effect of people not being able to afford their lives. And the increase in weather-related events across the country and food banks, we get implicated in, the recovery period in a lot of cases. And so it just doesn't feel like there's a time of stability on the horizon that will allow food banks to catch our breath.
Mm-hmm. Kirstin,
I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all hope. Yeah, it's good. One of those good things that we hope we're wrong on, but it's hard not to disagree or see the same thing. So let's continue that thread of discussion. Can you share some insights into the demographics of the people who rely on food banks? I mean, it strikes many that there's this paradox, right? We've basically got full employment in the country, but I guess these jobs aren't paying enough for people to be food secure, which I guess, as you said, it's a surprising thing, disappointing thing in a country like ours. You mentioned a broken social net. So talk about if you can, the demographics of people who rely on the food banks and what you know about them. And if there's, we know we went through a great disruption during the COVID era, but are there any other broad patterns that you've seen emerge in the recent years?
Yeah, of course. And so the first thing I'll say is that food insecurity lives within every community, every province, every territory across Canada. And it's often a silent problem. So we don't talk about it. We don't hear about it. But I assure you and all of your listeners that people in your lives who go to the food bank. So, but we do make sure that we do an intake with folks when they come to the food bank, and most food banks update that annually so that we can be sure that we're providing the right kinds of service. So we do get demographic information about the folks that come to food banks. And there's some, I would call them stubborn trends that we've been seeing over years, like a decade or more. Female-led single parent households tend to, be the most food insecure in Canada. We see children, unfortunately, it's a heartbreaking stat, but children represent about 33% of food bank clients, and they're about 20% of the overall population in Canada. So they're overrepresented in food bank.
And that percentage is going up, isn't it? Eh?
It's stubborn. It's staying the same, but it's a higher number, right? More people are using food banks, and we're not seeing the proportion of kids come down. So it means, as the growing number of people need food banks, families with kids are still being sort of overrepresented. Mm-hmm. And then the other group is single adults. So adults living alone, many of them on social assistance. It's really hard to make life work when you've got one income and there's no buffer. So your rent goes up or you lose your job and there's no other income. There's no one else to help you get through the tough time. And, with social assistance rates, they're just so far below the poverty line that it's very challenging for folks to get their lives back on track. You end up spending most of your time making sure you can get through the day. Mm-hmm. So those are sort of the stubborn trends. And now what we've been seeing in the last couple of years are a growing number of new types of folks. So seniors in Canada have tended to be quite underrepresented in food bank use. We've got a good safety net for folks once they hit their senior years, but unfortunately we're seeing that number climb. So, with the cost side of the equation going up, seniors aren't able to meet their expenses. And I always think that's so heartbreaking. It takes a lot for a senior to walk through the door of a food bank. There's a lot of pride. And
historically, that number has been very, very low. As you said, we basically have a guaranteed minimum income program with OAS for Canadian seniors. But so it's been in the 1% to 2%. Is that, are you seeing that number go up fairly significantly?
It's climbing. It's still lowish, but it's a lead indicator of how tough times are, that we're seeing more seniors turn to us.
Yep.
So again, it's not a big portion of the people who need food banks, but not a good trend. Going up, quite rapidly. The other thing we're seeing is a growing number of people with jobs. So it's tended to sit around 11% of people who use food banks have employment income as their primary source of income. And we're seeing that number climb. And that's, again, to be expected with the expense side of the equation just growing. And students, rather, we're seeing a lot of need within post-secondary students across the country.
Now, we also have a lot more Canadians than we used to. I mean, we hit 40 million this summer. Are you seeing new Canadians visiting the food banks as well?
Yeah, we are. We're seeing that there isn't necessarily a plan in place. Of course, we know that we need new Canadians. We need to be welcoming as a country and make sure folks get settled in and they're able to find jobs. And what's happening is that they come to Canada. The costs are incredibly high, and the social supports are, food banks become a support as people get settled. So yeah, we are seeing an increasing number of newcomers.
Well, let's talk about those supports. So collaboration, key to your successful organization, I'm sure. So it's a very complex issue. Tell us about some of the partnerships and collaborations that we might know or might not know that Food Banks Canada has formed to complete, to further its mission.
Yeah, I mean, I think of food banking itself as it's collaborative by nature. I mean, what food banks are at their core is bringing different types of people together to help make sure a community is healthy. So at the local level, you've got volunteers, you've got donors, you've got businesses, local businesses that help, whether that's, your local grocery store managers or, other local leaders giving money. And then you've got folks coming through the door as clients. And that's the magic of food banking, is that it is all of these different types of partnerships. At the national level, Food Banks Canada relies heavily on the support of the corporate sector in Canada. So we, both from a food perspective and a funds perspective. So we get donations from large Canadian and international companies and make sure those get shared throughout the food banking system where the needs are. We also are very well supported by the corporate sector in terms of food, and that includes the grocery stores. So we can't do what we do without the support of folks all across the country.
Yeah, I guess because as much as there is available, grocers, for example, are pretty efficient. So sometimes you just need funds to just bridge that gap. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, food bank. One of the big changes that we've seen in food banking throughout the pandemic is it's been a massive shift in food sources. So. Public donations obviously took a hit during the pandemic. Folks weren't going to work. They weren't gathering. And food purchasing has gone up across the board. And I've talked to food banks, from Tofield, Alberta, right up to, Daily Bread and Moisson Montréal. Everyone's pretty much buying more food than they were heading into the pandemic to meet the need. So not just just to meet the growing need, but a higher portion of the overall amount of food coming in is purchased, and a real shift in relying on, corporate or larger scale donations from whether it's manufacturers, whether it's direct from producers or from the retail sector. Those are the kinds of donations that are really helpful. And so, as you said, funds are always critical because as food banks need to purchase more, they're able to purchase what the communities are in need of.
Well, let's see if we can help for the listeners. And we've got listeners who are, we've got brands, we've got grocers, we've got citizens. If they're interested in getting involved, supporting Food Bank Canada's mission, what are some of the ways they can contribute or even volunteer?
Yeah, so just a reminder to folks that food banks, Canada, and in our network, we've got provincial organizations and local food banks in every community across the country. If you've got something to donate, we would be glad to help figure out how to get that to where it's needed. We've got a logistics team. We ship food from coast to coast to coast. And so some people don't realize that, but we do actually ensure the distribution of food across the country. And then, it's just, we are so grateful for the support of folks across the country. If you are in a position to give, I do think those of us who aren't struggling right now really need to ensure that our neighbors in need are well supported in this, what is hopefully a short-lived time of elevated need. So if you are in a position to give, funds are always, as I said, it allows the food bank to buy healthy, culturally appropriate food. But if food is more tangible for you, then that's also very welcome. And then there's things you can do, like, if you're hosting dinner parties over the holidays, maybe make it focused on your neighbors who have less, and ask people to bring a donation of food or funds as part of your gatherings. As I said, I think I mentioned, hunger in Canada is a quiet problem, and we don't talk about it. And what my biggest ask is that we start to talk about it. We start to see this as a Canadian problem. And because it's only then that we can actually, create some political will to address some of the underlying issues and build a real movement to see some of the trends we're seeing go in the wrong direction flip and go in the right direction.
Your point about culturally appropriate is interesting. I mean, I think of, the 50-pound boxes of pasta. I love pasta, nothing wrong with pasta, but it's not right. The nature of the food that you and your clients or the users of the food banks is changing, right? They're looking for different things, and they're all looking for great nutrition, but the nature of the food is changing. I hadn't quite conceptualized that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And so as communities change, as demographics change, we try to always provide food that folks are going to eat and that they want to eat and that they know how to cook and prepare. And so it shifts. And, as I said, we're so grateful for folks who think of us when they, grab a few extra things and put that in the donation bin at their grocery store or at their place of work. But the food bank is really close to the clientele, and so can tell what foods are actually needed. And, sometimes, as you said, that's different than, pasta and sauce might be quite new to some folks. It might be chickpeas or lentils or some other staples that are really in need.
Mm-hmm. I've in the last 6 months, I visited a couple of food banks, the food bank in Calgary and Moisson Montréal this summer as well. And you're absolutely right, Kristin. I mean, yeah, food banks need the support. Absolutely. It's a very tough situation right now. It's historical almost. So obviously, and of course, as we get closer to the holidays, my guess is that more and more people will be in need. And so any last thoughts in terms of how we should address food insecurity in Canada from a policy perspective, perhaps?
Sure. I mean, we say all the time, food banks, we thank goodness we're here because people need to eat today, but food alone.
Last summer you had your 40th convention in Edmonton, where the first food bank was open 40 years ago, right?
Exactly. Edmonton's food bank was our first. We celebrated, but I won't say celebrated necessarily in the happiest way. We thought we would be closed by now, but yeah, it's so food alone won't solve the underlying issues of food insecurity. I think what we really need to see is political action and political courage, really, to address some of the underlying issues. And what creates political courage, of course, is the voices of many, many citizens across the country lending some noise to this as an issue. What we need to do is address both the affordability side that we're seeing stretch folks right now. Affordable housing, housing is the single highest expense for most folks, and we're not seeing the level of investment there. And then we need to look at the social safety net. We need to create income support so that people don't get further and deeper into poverty.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Kristin, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said at the very beginning, it's about time we actually have someone from Food Banks Canada joining us. And I know that typically the fall is a busy time for you guys. The hunger count is also coming. If you can remind our audience when it will be released.
Yes, thank you. So Hunger Count is our annual count of everyone across Canada who uses a food bank in the month of March. It gives us a snapshot of how we're doing as a country in terms of the folks using food banks. So this year, Hunger Count comes out on October 24th. So look for that.
All right. We'll look for that. And if folks want to get in touch with you, are you a LinkedIn person? And we can also put a whole bunch of links into the show notes. But if they want to reach out to you and the team, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so if you go to foodbankscanada.ca on our website, you can get a whole bunch of information there. I am on LinkedIn, Kirstin Beardsley, and I'm always happy to hear from folks. I get a lot of folks reaching in to offer support. So please reach in.
Well, fantastic. As Sylvain said, thanks so much for joining us on the pod, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, Kristin.
All right. Now, on the other side of food insecurity is, the obesity, weight gain, the size of the population, literally and figuratively. I want to talk about the impact of weight loss drugs, and I've been thinking about this more and more. So, when you think about Ozempic and Wegovy, which I've heard through the grapevine and people I know are being prescribed it to lose weight, and it is a phenomenal product. Now, there's some news about it.
So people using it? Yeah. Really?
And it's being described as a miracle drug. So there's a lot of discussion. Last week we were talking about the long range impact of California saying it's $20 an hour. Or what do they think of fast food? So interesting enough, surely doesn't PepsiCo mention it in their annual report?
It came up, yeah.
They said, "Wow, we don't really see anything happening," because there's a lot of people, including myself, who are starting to think about, like, even the airlines in America are saying we could save billions of dollars with lighter Americans. They all weigh less, so we'll use less fuel. Like I don't know if it's hyperbolic, but there's a lot.
Why not charge more?
Well,
Can you imagine how discriminatory would that be?
Yeah. Okay. But I guess we're starting to dawn on us. These things have been around for a while. What are they called? Semaglutide drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, they've revolutionized the towns where they're from. I mean, these things could be the weight loss miracle drug, which could, weight loss, being overweight is probably one of the biggest health concerns in at the top of the list. I mean, in some ways. So anyway, I want to get your impression about how much we should be thinking about the implications of these weight loss drugs, because they're starting to get some, right now it's like $1,000 to get it. So right now it's the rich person's weight loss program. But that's
$1,000 for what? Like for a month?
For treatment. Yeah, for a month for a treatment. So it's
a treatment.
Yeah, it's a needle.
See someone.
It's a needle. No, you pop it into your. It's like taking an insulin. You pop.
I actually thought it was some sort of pill.
It is in pill form. Starting to be in a pill form, but the most popular one, Ozempic and Wegovy, they're still not. It's off script to prescribe them for pure weight loss. They're a type 2 diabetic drug. As you can tell, I've been doing some research into this because I'm thinking about these impacts. What's the impact on fast food? Because it just creates significantly less interest in eating, right? Because it makes you feel very, very, very full.
Yeah.
And food companies, who is it? He called it so far PepsiCo said negligible. The CEO said on an analyst call, he said the company's keeping an eye on it though, and we're observing the growth of these new drugs and its potential impact. So this is serious. Some pretty interesting people are watching this. Do you have any early thoughts on this revolution?
Well, it's like anything. I mean, research will tell us if these drugs are actually good for you. And I suspect that regulators will be looking into this as a drug becomes more popular.
Yeah. So far, so good, by the way. I mean, so far, other than some issues that are known side effects.
There hasn't been any surprises. I really don't know. It's hard to tell. What I do realize is that snack food companies are nervous because they're talking about it.
Right.
That's a sign.
Yeah.
That's a sign. So when PepsiCo released its financial results yesterday, talking about it during a call to me was a signal.
Interesting.
That's a signal. Yeah. It means that they're concerned. And they wouldn't, of course, to reassure their shareholders, they wouldn't, oh my God, Ozempic is going to kill our business. We need to think about, it's like Kellogg's. I mean, Kellogg's, if you remember 2 weeks ago, they decided to divide.
Kellanova or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so I think it's really because the marketplace is changing. I mean, they're isolating their North American cereal business from the rest. Yeah. They're hedging against their own cereal business.
The snack business versus the cereal business. Yeah. Hey,
so,
do you remember the last time this was tried? Do you remember Oleestra? So do you remember the whole story? So Procter and Gamble came up with this ingredient that basically made the fats not be absorbed. Now it had two implications, two problems. One, everybody just had immediate diarrhea, so that wasn't a great outcome. And two, the critics rightly said it created more appetite because you never felt the opposite of these drugs. You never felt full, so you're like,
that's right,
3 bags of chips in before you had any, and then you had certain outcomes.
So I must say, I mean, to see the food industry react and respond and comment about the existence of these treatments, to me, is
not
a
just
signal.
them, right? I mean, literally, the airline. Like, there's a lot of people starting to think about this. As I said, airlines are starting to say, you know what? If this trend takes hold, our planes are going to be significantly less heavy.
Yeah, so, exactly.
All right. Well, let's finish with you've got your new book. Your new book is out this week.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Well, it's a French book. Yeah, it's a French book. But
tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's my 8th baby, and it's coming out this week, and it's called La part du gâteau, which is if you translate it, it's a piece of cake, a piece of our cake, food geopolitics. It's about food geopolitics, and the idea behind the book was not mine. It was the editors. They called me and said, "Listen, I think we need a book on food geopolitics. What do you think?" I said, "Sure." And frankly, out of the 8 books I actually wrote, that was probably the easiest that I've written, because it just every morning this winter I was getting up and wrote 1,000 words every morning, and by the time after 2 months I had a book. It was really super easy to write. So it's been a while. As I finished writing it in February, early March. So I think I'm going to have to reread it. Well, all the interviews coming.
Yeah, what's your process? Because covering something like geopolitics is tricky in some ways because of the changes. I mean, big waves don't change, I suppose, right? So you use case studies, and there are several case studies, and obviously the big starting point was the Ukraine, obviously, right. And unfortunately, still an issue. A big issue.
Still an issue. It's going to be an issue for a long time, and of course Though
I hear, by the way, that quietly, I mean, now we're all looking at Israel, but quietly the Ukrainians are making pretty good progress in some of the ports. So we've got some good news, actually.
Honestly, this Black Sea deal is going to be an issue for years to come, and so and look at markets. Markets aren't reacting at all, and this is good news. And when I'll be at the coffee conference speaking, I'll be talking about how markets are different now compared to last year. I think they're uncertainty fatigued. They're just, I think markets are tired of being worried.
So are they more resilient? Is that the net conclusion, that markets are more resilient to these shocks?
Every time President Putin mentions something, or there's a bombing at Odessa or something like that, markets aren't moving. It's just nothing. I mean, a cargo actually got bombed close to Romania last week. No movement, nothing. And so And so with Israel, again, I was just waiting. And with India and rice in the summer, I thought markets would move. Nothing. It's really interesting to see. So I think what's going on right now, and I suspect some AI has got to do with it. Traders are just looking at markets in a much more somber way, if you will. They're not as panicky as they used to, which is really good news for everyone.
Interesting. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes to the book. It's on sale. I guess it would be on sale by the time this podcast releases.
as of today. Yeah.
Ah, fantastic.
But you can, but it's only in French though. That's the problem.
I gotta go. I got a plane to catch. I'm going to the Big Apple, New York City.
Yahoo!
For a global e-commerce leaders podcast.
You love New York.
I do love
New York.
I do love New York.
Yes.
But for now, until next week, that's the show. For all of you listening on your favorite podcast platform, please subscribe or follow us so you get each and every episode automatically in your feed. And be sure and share the podcast with your friends in the food, grocery, and restaurant industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, keynote speaker, podcaster, and you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Well, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you on the mic next week.
Take care. Bye-bye.